Welcome for another edition of the video productions by the Artelino company. I'm Dieter, your host today for this video, and Dieter Vanschura, and I'm the owner of a little family company located in southern Germany, to be more precise, in Bavaria, where it's more beautiful than in the north of Germany. Excuse me, Prussians. We've sold art prints, mainly Japanese prints, in weekly online auctions since 2001. So by now we are 20 years old, my goodness. And we are exclusively online, but we operate a little bit like a conventional auction house. It means we have no own inventory, but all the prints that we offer to you, they are consigned to us by collectors, dealers, and now more and more also by contemporary artists. But this video is not about contemporary prints, but in this video I want to present you several selected Japanese prints from the 19th century, from the current auction, which is titled Japanese Prints and Modern Prints, or Japanese Prints and Contemporary Prints, and it's the auction 1711. And we write a bunch of articles. Sometimes we support each auction with an article, and I now show you where you can find that. You see here in this last section. Can you see it? Yeah, good. Okay, there you find a bunch of contents, mostly about Japanese art, but more and more now also about other art sections, especially contemporary art prints. And here you see articles, art, and there selected Ukiyo-e. For beginners in Japanese prints, Ukiyo-e is another word for Japanese prints, let's say until 1900. Let's jump to the first one. The first is by Kuniyoshi Uttagawa. In this auction, we have so roughly 12 rather solid, pretty good prints by Kuniyoshi Uttagawa. He died in 1865, and he's one of the most prolific printmakers. His prints, you can find it frequently on the internet and in auction catalogs. But this is something a little bit special regarding the subject. Yeah, you see a guy with a nice hairdo and a monkey on his shoulder, and a beautiful landscape in the background. And this shows a Saruma Washi. What is a Saruma Washi? It's a Japanese expression and stands for monkey handler. Saru is the Japanese word for monkey. And Saruma Washi, these were street performers who traveled from town to town with a trained monkey or two trained monkeys and showed their tricks in the streets, of course, to make some money. And then they moved to the next town. And by the way, these Saruma Washi, they still exist until our days. You don't see them often in Japan, but you can still see Saruma Washi. And as a Japanese print, it's rather rare. And this one is in pretty good condition. You see rather fresh colors, a good impression, and a good condition. And this is now also something for beginners in Japanese prints. I just told you the three most important factors for the value of a Japanese print. Again, the condition, meaning, okay, does it have tears or spots or foxing? This one does not. The impression quality, how well is it printed? Because these wooden blocks, they wear off, and you can only print a few thousands, and then the first copy is always better than the last one. And this is defined as impression quality. And then finally, the freshness of the color, that is the third factor. So remember that. Well, one example of, I think, 12 prints by Kuniyoshi The next one is by the rival of Konisada. His name was Kuniyoshi Uttagawa. He lived so roughly at the same time. And this is a scene from the Japanese Kabuki theater. The Japanese Kabuki theater was the most important market for Japanese prints. Beginners in Japanese prints should also know that at that time in the 19th century, the production of such prints was not regarded as high art, but as an artisan job, print making, and it was a commercial business. And the main market was this popular Kabuki theater, and Kabuki actors were as popular in those times as today's movie stars. And it's the same. I mean, you can buy posters of your favorite movie stars. And at that time, people bought prints of their favorite Kabuki actors. Next one. This is by a guy, Konichiga Toyohara. In the literature of Japanese prints, he's called the last master of Ukiyo-e. So he was active towards the end of the 19th century. And this is an especially well-preserved, nice triptych, also rather elaborate, which for many prints of this late 19th century is not the case, and therefore it's not so quite cheap. But quality is never cheap, my friends, never. Okay, here we touch a new genre. This shows foreigners on horses in Japan. So what is so unusual about foreigners in Japan? I now have to avoid to make a history lesson, but you should know that Japan, until 1854, was a completely isolated and secluded country for foreigners. For more than 250 years, so roughly since 1600, no foreigner was allowed to enter Japan except for a small trade post which was occupied by a dozen Dutch people. The Dutch, for nearly 250 years, had the trade monopoly with Japan, but they could not move freely in Japan. They were limited to a small artificial island in Nagasaki. And in 1854, an American fleet of warships, iron steel warships mostly, they landed in the Bay of Yokohama under the command of Commander Perry, Galbraith Perry, and they forced a treaty with the Japanese to open their harbors for trade with the Americans, with the United States, and later all the other nations followed, and this ended this isolation of Japan. And you can say until roughly 1850, 1860, Japan was a completely medieval country, and they were completely flabbergasted and shocked when they saw iron ships and when they saw, other Western gadgets that were completely unknown for them. They were practically on the level of 12th, 13th, 14th century at best at that time. And therefore, foreigners were a sensation. Also, those Americans then who arrived, they were restricted to also a small enclave in the harbor of Yokohama, and therefore these prints showing foreigners, they are called Yokohama-e, and those showing the Dutch are called Nagasaki-e. E is the Japanese word for image or for a picture. You must imagine at that time there was no newspaper, and these prints, they were the means to spread message. It was like a newspaper, and the Japanese were crazy to buy them. Yeah, and thus it was a great market, and all printmakers rushed to make Yokohama-e. And this is an especially good example, very well preserved, very fresh colors. And in the current auction we have one or two more, and I show them here. Well, this shows foreigners in a carriage, probably later when foreigners were already allowed to move more freely in the country. And we have a third one, and all these are rather rare and rather exceptional because of their good condition, their fresh colors, and their excellent impression quality. And this shows a party of foreigners in the harbor of Yokohama. There you see in the background, well, these ships by the foreigners. At that time, the Japanese, when this fleet of black ships arrived, Japanese had only wooden ships of a quality of European 1400. Okay, next one. Yeah, now we make a jump to the Meiji period. The Meiji period was characterized by the industrialization and westernization of Japan after the opening. Japan at that time made a huge jump forward comparable to China over the last 20, 30 years, and changed at an incredible speed from a medieval country to a modern industrialized country after Western patterns. And one of the best and dominating printmakers at that time, the so-called Meiji period, was Yoshitoshi. And Yoshitoshi was skeptical towards this modernization and made many prints that have to do with the past of Japan. And this is such an example. And this is a very nice triptych showing a scene from old Japan, showing a former emperor. And what's so unusual, it was made, it's a triptych. Yeah? These are 3 panels, but it's made here like a rollable, like a scroll. Very rare. I cannot remember having seen that before. So by Yoshitoshi. And here another one by Yoshitoshi from the series Meisho Kagami, that also shows scenes from Japan's history. And this is about a famous fight between Yoshitsune and Benkei. I don't want to explain that now, otherwise the video definitely would become too long. Take a look at our article section. There you find an article about this fight on the Goyo Bridge. Search for Benkei or Yoshitsune, or go to YouTube. There we also now have a bunch of videos, and I think we made a video about Benkei, the warrior monk. And the last one is by Kiyokata Kaburagi. Kiyokata Kaburagi, for heaven's sake. He was active towards the late 19th century, and his art is already a kind of trailblazer or bridge into a new renaissance of Japanese printmaking, the so-called Shinhanga art movement of the first half of the 19th century. And if you're a little bit familiar with Shinhanga prints, you can already recognize in this print, made in late 19th century, some of the characteristics for this new style called Shinhanga. Okay, I think that was the last of these selected art prints from the current auction. Current auction, 1,000 711, which I wanted to present. And this auction will end tomorrow. Our auctions always end Sunday at 8 p.m. Central European time. We are usually 6 hours ahead of you guys, US East Coast, 9 hours US West Coast. And I would be pleased to see you there in our auctions, not only as viewers, but as bidders, of course. And yeah, this was it. Thanks for watching and have a good week. Goodbye.